Welcome back, or welcome if you're new. Did you know 97% of our viewers aren't subscribed? By subscribing, you'll be the first to see every new story we release. No more searching. Plus, it really supports the channel and allows us to keep creating the content you enjoy. If you value these stories, take a moment and subscribe below. Thanks. Okay, now to today's story. Sometimes I think back to that night, and it still feels like a dream. Not the kind of dream you tell folks about with a smile, though. More like the kind that sticks with you, that you replay in your head late at night when the house is quiet. It changed things, you see. Changed me. And all because of a flat tire. On a road where the only company was the sound of my own heartbeat, and the cold. It's funny how life throws these little curveballs, isn't it? You think you've got it all figured out, or at least you've settled into a rhythm, and then, bam! Something unexpected happens that makes you look at everything differently. That night was one of those, bam, moments for me. The cold had a way of seeping into everything that night, right through the layers of my worn flannel shirt, and the thick, but not thick enough, quilted jacket I'd pulled on. It wasn't just the air temperature. It felt like the cold of loneliness. A chill that had settled deep within me over the years. I was driving my old Ford pickup, affectionately nicknamed Betsy, a vehicle that had seen better days, much like myself, I often thought. Betsy had been with me through thick and thin, through moves and heartbreaks, and on that particular night, she felt like the only constant in my increasingly unpredictable life. She rattled and groaned with every bump in the deserted road, a familiar symphony of age and mileage that usually brought me a small measure of comfort. But tonight, even Betsy's familiar complaints seemed to amplify the silence and the solitude. I was on my way back from visiting Sarah, my sister. It was a longer drive than I usually like to make late at night, especially with the weather threatening to turn nasty. Sarah and we hadn't always seen eye to eye. Life had taken us down different paths for so long. But losing her husband, Mark, a good man gone too soon, had somehow reconnected us. Grief has a funny way of stripping away the unimportant stuff and showing you what truly matters. Family. That's what it boils down to, isn't it? And in the quiet aftermath of Mark's passing, Sarah needed me, and honestly, I needed her too. The visits were healing, in a quiet, understated way. We'd sit and talk for hours, sometimes about Mark, sometimes about nothing much at all, just the comfortable murmur of two sisters sharing space. The radio was tuned to an oldies station, playing a soulful melody that tugged at the edges of my heart. It was one of those songs that paints vivid pictures in your mind, of younger days, of dreams that either came true or faded away like old photographs. My mind drifted, as it often did on these long drives, to memories of my late husband, Tom. We'd had good years, Tom and I. A quiet life, filled with simple pleasures. His sudden illness had been like a thief in the night, stealing away our future, leaving me with a void that no amount of time seemed to fill. The loneliness, it wasn't a constant, sharp pain, but more of a dull ache. A persistent reminder of what was missing. The road stretched out before me, an endless ribbon of asphalt swallowed by the darkness. The headlights of Betsy cut through the blackness, creating a small, temporary bubble of light in the vast expanse. The wind buffeted the truck, making it sway slightly, and I gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. I kept glancing in the rear-view mirror, a habit I'd picked up over the years. It wasn't that I expected to see anything, just the endless blackness behind me. But it was a way of checking, I suppose, a subconscious reassurance that the world hadn't just disappeared while I was lost in my thoughts. Then, it happened. A subtle shift in the rhythm of the truck, a faint thumping sound that grew steadily, louder. Thump, thump, thump. My stomach clenched. Not that pleasant flutter of anticipation, but the cold, hard knot of dread. I knew instantly what that sound meant. A flat tire. On this desolate stretch of road, on this cold, lonely night. It felt almost comical in its bad timing, like the universe was playing a cruel joke on me. I eased Betsy over to the side of the road, onto a narrow strip of gravel that barely qualified as a shoulder. The ground looked uneven and treacherous. I flicked on the hazard lights, their orange flashes a weak, desperate signal in the overwhelming darkness. With a sigh, I turned off the engine. The sudden silence was almost jarring, broken only by the mournful howl of the wind whistling through the bare branches of the trees lining the road. It felt like the world had gone mute, leaving me utterly alone with my predicament. I reached for my flashlight in the glove compartment, the cheap plastic feeling flimsy in my hand. The beam wavered as I climbed out of the truck, the cold air instantly biting at my exposed skin. I trudged to the back of Betsy, the gravel crunching under my boots. And there it was. The passenger side rear tire, looking deflated and defeated, like it had simply given up. Well, isn't this just perfect? I muttered under my breath, the words lost to the wind. Just what I needed. I knew the basic steps for changing a tire. My dad, a practical man who believed in self-sufficiency, had shown me how when I was just a girl, probably around 7th grade. I could still picture him, his brow furrowed in concentration as he explained the mechanics of the jack and the lug wrench. But that was decades ago. And I'd never actually had to do it myself, not in the pitch black, not with the temperature dropping, and certainly not with this gnawing feeling of helplessness washing over me. I fumbled for my cell phone in my pocket. The screen flickered to life, displaying the dreaded no service message. I took a few steps away from the truck, holding the phone up high, turning in a slow circle, like some kind of ancient ritual to appease the cellular gods. Finally, a single bar appeared, a fragile, fleeting connection to the outside world. I tried calling 8AA again, but the weak signal refused to cooperate, the call dropping before it even connected. I tried Sarah, hoping against hope that she might still be awake, but it went straight to voicemail. A knot of panic tightened in my chest. It wasn't just the flat tire, the inconvenience of being stranded. It was the weight of everything else, the loneliness, the feeling of being stuck in a life that felt increasingly smaller and more isolated. The darkness seemed to press in on me, and every rustle in the nearby woods sounded amplified, ominous. My imagination, usually a quiet companion, started conjuring up all sorts of unpleasant scenarios. I shivered, pulling my jacket tighter around me, the thin fabric offering little comfort against the biting wind. I didn't know what to do. I just stood there beside Betsy, the beam of my flashlight shaking slightly in my hand, feeling utterly and completely alone in the vast, indifferent darkness. And then, through the inky blackness, I saw them, 2 small points of light in the distance, growing steadily larger, brighter. Headlights. Hope, a tiny, fragile spark, flickered to life within me. Please, I thought, my heart pounding in my chest, please let it be someone who can help. The approaching car slowed as it drew nearer, its headlights cutting through the darkness like twin beams of salvation. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of anticipation and a lingering sliver of apprehension. It was a newer model sedan, sleek and dark, a far cry from the beat-up pickup trucks that usually frequented this stretch of highway, late at night. It pulled over a little ways ahead of my truck, its brake lights flaring red in the darkness. For a fleeting moment, a fresh wave of anxiety washed over me. What if my initial hope was misplaced? What if this wasn't someone who genuinely wanted to help? What if it was something else entirely? The news was full of stories these days, stories that made you wary of strangers, especially out here in the middle of nowhere. The driver's side door opened, and a figure emerged. He was tall, silhouetted against the car's interior light, and he moved with a kind of easygoing confidence. As he walked towards me, the beam of my flashlight caught his face. He looked to be in his late 20s, maybe early 30s, with a friendly, open expression. He was dressed casually in a denim jacket and jeans, and even in the dim light, I could see a hint of a smile playing on his lips. He didn't look threatening. Not at all. In fact, there was something inherently reassuring about his presence. "Looks like you've got a flat," he said, his voice calm and even, cutting through the wind. There was no judgment in his tone, just a matter-of-fact observation. I swallowed, trying to project a sense of composure I didn't quite feel. "Yeah, sure do. And my cell signal is about as useful as a screen door on a submarine." The attempt at humor felt weak, even to my own ears, but he chuckled softly. "Tell me about it. This stretch of road is a notorious dead zone. You got a spare?" he asked, his gaze shifting to the back of my truck. "Yeah, in the back," I replied, gesturing with my flashlight. "But I haven't changed. A tire in years. My husband used to always take care of things like this." The words slipped out before I could stop them. A small, involuntary admission of my vulnerability. "No problem at all," he said, a genuine smile now gracing his face. "I can handle it. Name's Andrew, by the way." He extended his hand towards me. "Rachel," I replied, my hand feeling small and cold as I reached out to shake his. His grip was firm but gentle, and his hand felt warm. He had kind eyes, the kind that seemed to hold a genuine concern. Looking into them, I felt a sliver of the tension I'd been carrying begin to ease. He walked towards the back of my truck, and I fumbled with the stubborn latch on the toolbox. He took it from my hands with a reassuring nod. He seemed to know exactly what he was doing, his movements efficient and practiced. He located the jack and the lug wrench quickly, his confidence a stark contrast to my earlier fumbling. In no time, he was kneeling beside the flat tire, the beam of my flashlight illuminating his work. He loosened the lug nuts with practiced ease, the metal groaning slightly under the pressure. He worked quickly and methodically, his movements fluid and sure. I just stood there, watching him, feeling a strange mix of relief, gratitude, and a touch of embarrassment at my own lack of preparedness. It had been a long time since I'd relied on anyone for help like this. As he worked, he made small talk, asking me where I was headed and where I'd been. He didn't pry or ask any personal questions, just kept the conversation light and easy, filling the silence with a comforting murmur of words. He mentioned he was on his way back from visiting a friend in the next town over, someone who was going through a tough time. It was a small detail, but it spoke volumes about his character. It wasn't long before the flat tire was off, looking even more deflated in the harsh light of the flashlight, and the spare was being mounted in its place. He tightened the lug, nuts securely, then lowered the truck with a smooth cranking motion of the jack. "There you go," he said, standing up and wiping his hands on his jeans. "Good as new." "Oh, thank you, Andrew," I said, a lump forming in my throat. The relief was almost overwhelming. I honestly don't know what I would have done without you. I was starting to get really worried. "No worries at all," he said, smiling again. "Glad I could help. You want me to follow you for a bit? Make sure you get to a gas station or somewhere you can get that tire fixed properly?" "That would be wonderful," I said, feeling a huge weight lift off my shoulders. "I really appreciate that more than you know." He carefully placed the flat tire into the back of my truck, along with the jack and the lug wrench. Then we both got back into our respective cars. He pulled out onto the road first, and I followed him, my hazard lights finally switched off, their frantic blinking replaced by a steady sense of gratitude. The drive to the nearest town wasn't long, but it felt like a lifetime had passed since I'd first heard that ominous thump, thump, thump. The silence in my truck wasn't so heavy anymore. The wind still howled outside, but it didn't sound quite so menacing. The underlying loneliness was still there, a familiar companion, but now it was tempered by a profound sense of gratitude and a tiny, almost imperceptible flicker of something new, something hopeful. the kindness of a stranger on a cold, dark night. It was a small thing, perhaps, but it had made a world of difference. Andrew's headlights led me to a small, unassuming tire shop just off the main drag of the sleepy little town. It looked like the kind of establishment that had been a fixture in the community for decades, its faded blue paint peeling slightly around the edges and a weathered sign creaking gently in the breeze. The sign proclaiming Earl's Tires on a service. Since '78, probably hadn't seen a fresh coat of paint since, well, 1978. But it was open, a beacon of hope in the late hour, and that was all that truly mattered. He pulled into the dimly lit parking lot, the gravel crunching under his tires, and I parked Betsy beside his sleek sedan. We both got out of our cars, the sudden quiet of the small town a stark contrast to the roaring wind on the highway. "Think they can fix that for you?" Andrew asked, nodding towards the deflated tire in the back of my truck. "Hopefully," I replied, a touch of uncertainty in my voice. "I think I might have a patch kit somewhere in the garage back home, but honestly, I wouldn't trust myself to do it right. Not after tonight." We walked towards the shop, the air thick with the unmistakable aroma of rubber and oil, a scent that always triggered a wave of nostalgia, reminding me of my dad's old garage, a place filled with the comforting sounds of tools and the faint smell of gasoline. An older man, his face etched with the lines of time and his hands bearing the permanent marks of grease and hard work, emerged from the dimly lit interior of the shop, a friendly smile creasing his weathered face. "Evening," he said, his voice raspy but warm. "What can I do for you folks?" Andrew stepped forward, taking the lead. "This lady here got a flat out on the highway. We were wondering if you could take a look at it for her." "Sure thing," the owner said, his eyes turning to me, a look of understanding in them. "Bad luck that." "Tell me about it," I said, managing a weak smile. It felt good to finally be in a place where I could get some help. Andrew briefly recounted the story of finding me stranded on the side of the road and how he'd stopped to assist. The shop owner, whose name tag read Earl, nodded sagely. "Well, you came to the right place. We'll get you fixed up in no time. You just relax inside." Earl and Andrew together wrestled the flat tire out of the back of my truck. While Earl disappeared into the back of the shop with the damaged tire, the whirring and clanking of machinery soon filling the air, Andrew and I stood in the small waiting area, a slightly awkward silence settling between us. It wasn't the tense, anxiety-ridden silence of the highway, but more of a quiet, almost comfortable pause. I felt a strong urge to express my gratitude again, to properly thank Andrew for his unexpected act of kindness. "Andrew," I began, my voice a little shaky, "I really don't know how to thank you. You truly saved me out there. I was honestly terrified." He shrugged, a modest gesture. "Like I said, it was no problem at all. I've been there myself. You know? Not with a flat tire, thankfully, but stuck. Feeling like you're all alone and nobody cares. It's a crummy feeling, and nobody should have to go through that." His words resonated deeply within me. There was a genuine empathy in his voice, a sense that he truly understood the vulnerability I had felt out on that deserted road. It was like he could see past the surface, past the slightly flustered woman with the flat tire, and recognize the deeper loneliness I carried. "Yeah," I said softly, my gaze drifting down to the worn linoleum floor. "It is." We stood there for a few more minutes, the rhythmic sounds from the back of the shop the only interruption to the quiet. Earl eventually reappeared, holding up the patched tire with a satisfied grin. "Got it all fixed up for you," he announced. "Good as new. Just gotta put it back on." Andrew immediately offered to help, and soon the spare tire was off, looking decidedly smaller and less substantial than the newly repaired one. They worked together quickly, their movements synchronized and efficient. Earl charged me a reasonable price for the repair, and I paid him with a heartfelt thank you, feeling an immense wave of relief wash over me. As we were preparing to leave the shop, Andrew turned to me, a slightly hesitant expression on his face. "So?" he said, his eyes meeting mine. "You heading straight home now?" "Yeah, I suppose so," I replied, glancing at the clock on the wall. It was later than I'd realized. "It's getting pretty late." "Well," he said, looking around the quiet little town, "this place ain't much to look at, but I noticed a decent-looking little diner just down the street when we drove in. And, I was thinking maybe we could grab a cup of coffee. Or something? Just to warm up a bit before you head back out on the road?" My heart gave a little leap, a surprising flutter of something akin to excitement. I hadn't expected that invitation. I'd assumed that once the tire was fixed, we'd simply go our separate ways. The thought of spending a little more time with him, even just for a quick cup of coffee, was unexpectedly appealing. But it also felt a little daunting, a step outside my carefully constructed comfort zone. It had been a long time since I'd engaged in anything remotely resembling a social outing with someone I'd just met. I hesitated for a moment, studying his face. His smile was kind and genuine, and there was a warmth in his eyes that put me at ease. "I don't know," I said, feeling a little flustered. "It is pretty late." "Just for a little while," he said gently, his voice reassuring. "No pressure at all. But it would be nice to, not just say goodbye on the side of the road after all that happened." He had a valid point. And honestly, the prospect of returning to my quiet, empty house after the unexpected drama of the evening felt even more desolate than before. The idea of a warm cup of coffee and a little more conversation with this kind stranger was surprisingly tempting. "Okay," I said, taking a deep breath and trying to sound more casual than I felt. "Okay, a quick cup of coffee sounds nice." His smile widened, and for the first time that night, I felt a genuine smile spread across my own face, chasing away some of the lingering tension. Maybe, just maybe, this night wasn't quite over yet. Maybe there was a little more to this unexpected encounter. The diner was exactly as he'd described, small and cozy, with worn red vinyl booths that had likely seen countless cups of coffee and late-night conversations. The air was thick with the comforting aroma of freshly brewed coffee and the faint, lingering scent of frying bacon, a classic diner combination that always felt strangely comforting, no matter the hour. There were only a handful of other patrons, scattered throughout the diner, mostly truckers with weary eyes and rumbling stomachs, stopping for a late-night bite before hitting the road again. We slid into a booth by the window, the worn vinyl groaning softly beneath us. A waitress, a woman with kind eyes that hinted at a lifetime of early mornings and late nights, but still held a genuine warmth, shuffled over to our booth, a notepad and pen in hand. She greeted us with a tired but friendly smile and took our orders. 2 coffees, black. Simple and to the point. The silence that followed wasn't awkward or strained like it had been in the tire shop. Instead, it felt comfortable, almost like we'd known each other for longer than just a couple of hours. There was an ease between us that I hadn't anticipated, a sense of shared experience from the unexpected events of the evening. We talked about everything and nothing in particular. He told me about his work as a software developer, explaining that he often worked remotely, which accounted for his late-night drive through this quiet part of the state. It wasn't the kind of profession I would have immediately associated with someone I'd meet on a deserted highway, but his explanation was straightforward and believable. I shared a little bit about my own life, about my sister Sarah, and about the small bookstore I used to own downtown before the rise of the big online retailers forced me to close its doors. It was a painful memory, but he listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions. I didn't delve into the deeper reasons behind my current solitude, the quiet ache of loss that still lingered, but he didn't pry. He simply listened, really listened, and nodded with an understanding that felt genuine. He had a way of making me feel seen, like my experiences and my thoughts actually mattered. It was a feeling I hadn't realized how much I'd missed, a sense of connection that had been absent from my life for too long. We revisited the flat tire incident, and we both found ourselves laughing a little at the absurdity of it all, the sheer bad luck that had brought us together. He recounted a story about a time he'd gotten his car stuck in the mud on a camping trip, miles from anywhere, and suddenly my own predicament didn't seem quite so dramatic or embarrassing. Sharing those little mishaps, those moments of vulnerability, somehow created a stronger bond between us. As we talked, I started to notice small details about him, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, a genuine warm expression that reached beyond just his lips. The way he'd occasionally run a hand through his dark hair when he was considering a question or formulating a thought. The quiet kindness that seemed to radiate from him. He asked me about my hobbies, and I confessed that I used to love to hike and explore the network of trails around the area, but it was something I hadn't done much of lately. Life had a way of pushing those enjoyable things to the back burner, didn't it? You really should get back into it, he said, his gaze turning towards the dimly lit street outside. There are some truly beautiful spots around here. I've done a bit of hiking myself. Maybe you know some of the same trails. Then he said something that caught me completely off guard, a suggestion that sparked a tiny flicker of something I hadn't felt in years. You know, he said, looking out the window at the quiet street, this town, despite its size, actually has a rather charming little walking trail that runs along the river. It's nothing too strenuous, mostly flat and easy, but it's particularly lovely at sunrise. If you're not in a huge rush to get back home, maybe we could take a walk down there? Just to stretch our legs and see the town in the early morning light? My heart did a little jump, a surprising and unexpected flutter. Sunrise? That would mean lingering here, in this small town, with this man I'd just met, until morning. It felt a little impulsive, a little out of character for the way I'd been living my life lately. But there was something about the way he'd phrased the invitation, so casual, and yet so hopeful, that made me actually consider it. I looked at him across the small table. Really looked at him. He wasn't pushy or insistent. He just seemed genuinely nice, really nice. And a small voice inside me whispered that maybe, just maybe, I deserved a little bit of nice in my life after all the lonely nights. The waitress returned with our steaming mugs of coffee. We both took a tentative sip, the warmth spreading through me, chasing away the last vestiges of the highway chill. I don't know, I said, hesitating again, a familiar wave of caution washing over me. I haven't watched a sunrise in a very long time. Maybe it's time you did, he said softly, his eyes meeting mine. There was a gentle encouragement in his gaze, a quiet invitation to step outside my comfort zone. I thought about my empty house, the deafening silence that would greet me there. And then I pictured the possibility of a new day, a fresh start, with this unexpected companion who had appeared out of the darkness like a good Samaritan. A sense of something shifting within me. A feeling of possibility that had been dormant for years began to stir. It was a feeling of hope. And yes, if I was being honest with myself, a little bit of nervous excitement too. I took another sip of my coffee, the warmth a comforting presence. I looked at Andrew, and I saw a kind, patient smile waiting for my answer. Okay, I said, a small, hesitant smile finally gracing my own lips. Okay, let's watch the sunrise. The remainder of the night in the cozy diner seemed to melt away, filled with a comfortable rhythm of shared stories and easy laughter. We talked about our favorite books, our travel dreams, and even some of the funny mishaps we'd experienced over the years. The waitress, sensing a connection between us, even brought over a complimentary slice of apple pie, her eyes twinkling with a knowing smile. As the first faint blush of dawn began to paint the eastern sky with delicate hues of pink and soft oranges, we finally left the warm glow of the diner and walked the short distance down to the river trail. The air was crisp and invigorating, carrying the scent of damp earth and the promise of a new day. The only sounds were the gentle murmur of the flowing river and the cheerful chirping of birds awakening in the nearby trees. We strolled along the path side by side, not needing to fill the silence with constant conversation. It was a comfortable, quiet, a shared appreciation for the peaceful beauty of the early morning. The sunrise over the still water of the river was truly breathtaking, a vibrant explosion of color that seemed to chase away the last shadows of the night, both literally and figuratively. Standing there next to Andrew, watching the world slowly awaken with the rising sun, I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me, a tranquility I hadn't experienced in what felt like an eternity. It was more than just the relief of having my tire fixed and escaping a potentially frightening night alone. It was a deeper feeling, a sense that maybe, just maybe, life still held some unexpected beauty and connection for me. He didn't try to hold my hand or make any overtly romantic gestures. He simply stood beside me, respectful and quiet, allowing me to soak in the moment, to feel the warmth of the rising sun on my face and the gentle breeze in my hair. After the sun had fully risen, casting a golden glow over the landscape, we started to walk back towards the small town, the path bathed in the soft morning light. "Well," he said, stopping beside our parked cars, a hint of reluctance in his voice. "I guess this is where we say goodbye." A pang of disappointment, surprisingly sharp, resonated within me. I didn't want to say goodbye. Not yet. "Yeah," I said, my gaze dropping to the gravel at my feet. "Thank you again, Andrew. For everything. You really were my knight in shining armor out there." He smiled, a genuine, warm smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Anytime, Rachel. Really. And you know," he hesitated for a moment, then reached into the pocket of his denim jacket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. "Here's my number. If you ever need anything at all, or just feel like grabbing another cup of coffee sometime." My heart did another little flutter, a hopeful leap this time. I reached out and took the paper, my fingers brushing briefly against his. The simple touch sent a surprising little spark through me. I'd really like that," I said, my eyes meeting his. There was a sincerity in my voice that I hadn't realized I possessed. He beamed, his smile widening. "Great. You take care now, Rachel. Drive safe." "You too, Andrew," I replied, watching as he got into his car. He gave me a final wave as he pulled out of the parking lot. As I drove Betsy home that morning, the rising sun casting long shadows before me, I felt different. The familiar ache of loneliness was still there, a quiet undercurrent. But it wasn't as heavy, as all-consuming. It was lighter, somehow, mixed with a newfound sense of hope and the exciting possibility of a future connection. A flat tire on, a cold, dark night had unexpectedly led to a meeting with a kind stranger, a shared cup of coffee in a quiet diner, and a breathtaking sunrise by the river. It was a powerful reminder that sometimes, even in the most unexpected and challenging circumstances, a little bit of human kindness and connection can change everything. My life might not have taken a dramatic, immediate turn that day, but it had definitely shifted onto a slightly different path. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of anticipation for what might lie ahead. A sense that I was heading towards something new, something good. And it all started with a flat tire and the unexpected kindness of a stranger named Andrew. And you know what? Sometimes, that's all it takes to change the course of your life.